We are now officially
Interview
recording.
notes or what? Oh, all right. No.
Well, Father Jurgen, if my technology is good, which that's suspect, we are now being recorded as we speak. So,
Oh,
welcome.
all right.
Thank you for joining us. And as Kathleen stated, we've heard such wonderful things about you and the history that you have with the Bread of Life. And we wanted to share some history with our followers who I think are very excited about us celebrating our 40th anniversary, 4 decades of the Bread of Life. And you were there right at the beginning. So you more than anyone would be able to share the very beginnings of our mission. And we appreciate you taking the time with us today.
Well, I was 32 then and 72 now, so my memory has changed. But I hope there will be mostly accurate memories.
Yeah. Very good. We had wanted to pose a few questions to you, and
Sure.
one of the, if you could share with us perhaps a brief history of the beginning days that when you joined us in our mission, if you could share how you got started with the Bread of Life way back when, 40 years ago.
You went off screen again. I think there you are.
Sorry about that. So we start again?
Yes, of course. Did you share a brief history of how you did get started with the Bread of Life 40 years ago?
Well, one of the things I profoundly believe.
Modern technology is.
Yeah, but in fact, the beginning of Bread of Life came out of a parish conflict we were having. It was one of those things that was.
Oh, we keep losing them.
I think we got an internet problem.
And about styles of worship. And between contemporary styles of guitars and things like that, more traditional stuff.
Father Jurgen, we keep losing you.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
All right. You know what's happening? Someone's trying to call in. I don't know how to shut my phone off, so that won't. Is there a way to do that so no one will bother me? Anyone know anything about technology?
Yeah, we keep losing you. You pitch, everything goes off when somebody tries to call you.
What happens? That gets interrupted. All right, I'm trying to figure out what I can do to, so that won't happen. But I'm so dumb about these things. I don't know what to do.
All right.
If he calls again, I'm going to answer it on my phone and tell him to go away. All right.
But in the meantime, when he calls in, or if anyone else does, you keep going off screen, and we're not getting.
Is that what happens? All right.
Yeah.
I don't know
off screen completely.
Jurgen, is it a landline? Can you just literally unplug?
No.
You must be on your cell phone.
Yeah, it's my cell phone, but it feeds into my iPad, which is what I'm on.
Gotcha.
Okay.
The iPad is linked up to the cell phone. Okay, I think he has stopped, and hope nobody else will call him. I think he gave up. All right, shall we start again?
Yes, please. That sounds great.
I think
you know what? I might just
20 minutes are up.
I might just take you back a little bit
start
further.
over again. One of the profound convictions I have about God is if you give him things, he will turn bad situations into good and redeem things. And that was really how Bread of Life started. We're in the midst of a parish conflict, which was rather common in those days in churches, between worship styles. And I kind of felt ideally as a young idealistic priest that people could get along and tolerate each other's differences. And that's part of what Christian community is all about. But that was easier said than done. And the conflict got so bad, I seriously thought of quitting my job because I felt like standing at the Eucharist, especially for us in the Anglican tradition, as a Catholic tradition, the Eucharist is this most holy thing. that it was blasphemous, that people were kind of snickering and mocking each other in the middle of the Mass. And I just felt in my spirit. And so anyway, what I decided to do, I wrote a letter to the parish, said, we're splitting the service. This was not a compromise, political compromise, but because of our hardness of heart, it was like a divorce. And we're going to try to learn how to love each other, maybe from a distance. But that presented a logistical problem about our Sunday school. And so I came up with the idea of having a Wednesday evening Sunday school night where we would have dinner together, and there were a group of women who called themselves the Cooks for Christ, who were willing to cook meals, and everyone would come together. It was sort of like the demilitarized zone in our parish on Wednesday nights, and we would come together for dinner, for classes, and then for kind of a children's service, a children's mass, which of course the parents and adults were part of too. So that's how the Wednesday night Bread of Life actually began. Of course, it wasn't Bread of Life yet. But what began to happen was that people, somehow word got out in Malden, there was a Wednesday night dinner at St. Paul's Parish in Malden. And these people started showing up who weren't members of the parish. They weren't coming to our program. They just they heard there was a meal. And initially, I mean, I said to them, well, look, you're welcome to come to the meal, but you got to stay for the program. And this is really a educational program, not a soup kitchen on Wednesday nights. And I'll never forget one time in prayer, God spoke to me and said, Jurgen, I'm sending you these people. Why are you turning them away?
Wow.
And I felt really convicted that I was to welcome these people who were coming off the streets to our church. But that posed another problem. If we were going to welcome them, a lot of them were, as I suspect is still true, the Bread of Life, homeless folk, people with lots of mental issues, addiction problems, all kinds of things. And we had lots of children around, and I felt that we had to create a safe and responsible environment for everybody. At that point, I had been acquaintances with what I call the St. Francis of Malden. His name is Tom Fagley. He was running the drop-in center for the homeless and people. It was related to the Department of Mental Health, people who were deinstitutionalized. In those days, that was a year when a lot of people were coming out of mental hospitals, and as they were closing the mental hospitals and deinstitutionalizing people. He was in charge of this drop-in center for folk like that. And these were the people who were showing up, many of them who were showing up at our dinner. So I consulted him, and he came over and essentially did a training program with our cooks and our Sunday school teachers and me and the rest of the staff, the clergy, how to welcome the issues, safety and concerns like that. And so that really was, at that point, that's when Bread of Life really began to happen. It was a church program welcoming the poor and the homeless and the troubled off the streets. We encouraged them to come and stay beyond the meal, and they weren't required to, but a lot of them did. And one of the most special programs that was developed that really ministered to the folk was a thing called the Caring Sharing Group. And I know it was my associate priest, Father Roger Wooten, a saintly old priest who's still alive. He's 95 years old and is living at Brooksby Village. He's still alert, and I see him and chat with him often. He gathered this group of people were welcome where they could talk about their life and problems and be prayed for. And so it was really kind of a wonderful ministry of caring and sharing and prayer to those folk. And so that was really the beginning of Bread of Life back then.
Fascinating. And it continues on thanks to your beginnings with us. Were you aware of the need for food resources in the community at that time, that the need was so great prior to starting this Wednesday dinner?
Well, probably this is true of every church. people are always knocking on your door looking for money, you know, and looking for help. Sometimes it's legitimate. In other words, they really need help. Lots of times it's scams and they're trying to get money for drugs and stuff like that. So I always had a funny little bind about that. I didn't want to feed into people's drug habits and all that, but I didn't want to, Jesus says, refuse no beggar. St. Paul says, if a man won't work, he doesn't eat. So I try to put those two together. And I used to give, I'd say, look, I'll give you some money, but if you do some work around the church, like we were kind of in the middle of a downtown mall, then there was always lots of trash around, blowing around. So I'd say, just go around the church and pick up, you know, all the trash in the street and do some sweeping or cleaning. And then I gave them. So I sort of hired them for little jobs and gave them money. So that was really, and there were people in the parish itself, of course, who might lose a job or have struggles. And we as a parish, most Episcopal churches and clergy have a thing called the rector's discretionary fund, which is a fund set aside that I can use for anything I want, and basically it's used to help the poor. So there's always an awareness in every church that there are poor people around, troubled people. The poor, Jesus said, you'll always have with you. But I don't think we are aware of the extent of the issue, except to know, and correct me, Gabi, especially if I'm wrong, that generally the issue of hunger around here is not primarily an economic problem. It's a problem of other kinds of, the hunger issues is a secondary to other things: mental illness, addiction, homelessness, other kinds of things that also need to be addressed. So certainly one thing we discovered at Bread of Life, it isn't just giving them a meal. First of all, one meal a week is not going to, solve the problem. And it was exciting too how things unfolded, where people said that we can't just give them one meal a night. And we got other churches interested in what we were doing, and we expanded our feeding program to eventually, I think it was 4 nights, wasn't it, Gabi? Eventually, do you remember?
Yes.
Yeah. And then also, as I said, there were other issues. So we did have that caring sharing fellowship to help people stabilize their lives, hopefully with the help of God, kind of get their act together if possible. We had Tom very much involved. So with his knowledge of deinstitutionalized people and the gathering place, which I think was the name of the place that he was in charge of, so we could have partnership with them in their work with the deinstitutionalized. And also we developed other kinds of ministries. That's where Gabi began to come in as being more eventually an advocate, dealing with the social, the public systems that try to help the poor, but lots of times the poor don't know how to negotiate the systems. And so that was another area that eventually developed. The clothing ministry, which I have a special warm spot in my heart for, because my mother ran that, and she was very involved in that. So things began to expand out from just a meal to an understanding that, that the issues of the poor are much larger than just needing a meal. And so helping them on many other levels, at least, was the goal. But we're just a little church, but it was wonderful how God blessed us with so many other. I think we were very moved. One of the initial things that happened was the Jewish community. We were a Christian organization. The name of the program, Bread of Life, is, as you know, a Christian title. Jesus says, I am the bread of life. And that's where the name of the program came, which I gave it. And but the Jewish community, which was a significant presence in Malden, and at least in those days, asked if they could come and do a Christmas meal for us, for the poor. Figuring, this was our holiday, so we could have our holiday, but they would put on the Christmas meal. What a wonderful gesture of interfaith working together, things like that.
They continue to do that to this day.
Wonderful.
I know.
So
again, I praise God. I praise God. He just took this stupid rector who was throwing these people out, and turned it into something. And frankly, I always think of my early life there. You know, I don't think St. Paul's is doing very well as a church, but the Bread of Life is, I feel like, well, this is my big main child from my young priesthood. I birthed this child, and the child is grown up and is doing very well.
Wow.
And is 40 years old, this child.
Yeah, it's an adult.
The landscape has changed a little bit. So, because in 40 years, the economic boom of the 80s, remember the 80s after
Yeah.
the 70s, that was changed the landscape of a lot of cities. And there was just a
Yeah.
huge amount of money that was made. That's what movies like Wall Street and so on. I mean, that was the boom. I'm from New
Yeah.
York. That's when New York City got cleaned up. I mean, things were just incredible. And then you had the huge demand, the skyrocketing housing prices. So that's what's
right.
changed. I think at the
Gentrification.
meal, we still serve the people who, with the mental health, the substance abuse issues, and the need for the socialization and the other services is still big. But
Yeah.
what's grown hugely at Bread of Life is serving the economically disadvantaged because they do not have enough money to compete in this type of housing market, where the cost of living, especially housing, and other costs like medical, are so high. So that's where we've seen the huge increase in the amount of food that we give out over the 40
interesting.
years. The big change, yeah.
Thank you for sharing that you were the person that named the Bread of Life. That's an interesting, I did not realize that's such a beautiful name and how it came to be. It's good to know that you were you named the child the Bread of Life. And you referenced your
Well-
mother. You had said that she was involved at that time in clothing. Was she also involved in some other things at the beginning of Bread of Life as well with you?
Well, she was certainly one of the original cooks. She liked to help out. I mean, my mother had a profound sensitivity to the poor because, she was poor and we were poor. We came to this country as refugees, and I wish you could interview her and the kind of story she has of what it was like
Wow. Yeah.
to grow up in post-war Germany and the absolute devastating poverty and hunger and everything, and then coming to this country literally with nothing and starting. So she always had a profound heart for the poor. So she was very involved from the beginning, cooking and all that. And then, as I said, somewhere along the line, I don't remember all the details, the idea of a clothing ministry developed. And so she was running the clothing ministry. I remember we had it up on the stage. We had our dinners in the upstairs hall of the church, where we used to, another thing that I had done was we posted a grace that we used to sing. Come and dine, the master calleth, come and dine. You can feast at Jesus' table all the time. He who fed the multitudes, turned to the water into wine, calls the hungry, come and dine. And we would sing that at the beginning, and we had it posted up on the backboards of the basketball court, which was at each end of the hall, so people could read it and sing it.
I just found a picture of that, Father.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, so we will post that picture, definitely.
That would
Yeah.
be great.
Gabriella and I talked about singing that before the meals. Yep.
That sounds
Well,
great.
maybe Gabi can sing it as part of because she's got a beautiful voice. Put it up. You remember the tune, Gabi?
Come and dine, the master calleth, come and dine. You can feast at Jesus' table all the time. He who fed the multitude turned the water into wine. To the hungry calleth now, come and dine.
Aw.
See, there it is. Beautiful.
Sang it many times.
Yeah.
When did you move on from St. Paul's? Do you remember the year
Well,
that?
I was there from 14 years. It was actually my longest cure, as we call it in the priesthood. Time I was in a parish. My children were born there, so that's very special. And they were exposed to all that as little children. and both of them, it's interesting. You never know what seeds you plant. Both my children have their careers are very involved with the poor. My daughter works for the Gates Foundation and is in charge of international women's health issues, and has made a complete career out of that. My son works with a thing called impact investing, with Christian impact investing, which is trying to figure out economic ways to take Christian money, invest it in causes that help the poor, particularly in South America. Like he spent a year working in Bolivia among the poor there. So both of them, and I suspect this, you know, when every Wednesday night you're coming to church there as a little child, and the poor around you, and you're eating, and I trust those seeds came from that kind of experience. And I hope the seeds were planted in other children's hearts and minds too.
Did you have thoughts or concerns when you did move on from St. Paul's about this mission continuing without you at St. Paul's?
Well, one always, you know, particularly because that was my first parish. I mean, before that, I was a youth minister at another church, but that was my first parish. So it's sort of like your first, you hope it'll carry on, but you also just have to let go. It's a little like your children, you know, you got to let them grow up, and hope that you've planted good things that will grow into good fruit in their lives. And so, but I, in a way, I've been surprised that the Bread of Life, as I said earlier, is doing much better than the churches. And I knew there was always conflict in the church about this. Not a lot, but some, where people would say, "Why are we doing this to those people?" You know, there were people who didn't think we should be doing this ministry. I don't know how they could read the gospel and say that, but they managed to do that. And then I think, Gabi, you stayed on there, and you've been connected forever there now. I think there wasn't as much zeal for things from the leadership of the parish. If that's what I've been told, and I don't want to. I could be wrong, and correct me. And so eventually there was kind of a disappointing, I think, split of the church from Bread of Life. In other words, Bread of Life continued, but it wasn't like an integral part of the parish ministry and the people involved and all of that. Is that fair, Gabi? Yeah. So
I think very quickly too.
Because
I was just going to say, I think very quickly then too, we found the space at 511 Main Street, just at a time when we were really worried about what we were going to do. And so that, you know, God again provided for us, because we moved, and it let us continue our relationship with St. Paul's in terms of serving our meals, but not having, you know, the rest of the offices and everything. We had no place to meet now. So that sort of took care of everything for us.
When did you connect with Bread of Life?
I came in '87, and you didn't really know me very well. I was there with when Sacred Hearts Parish joined.
That's how.
Madeline Marino was a friend of mine, and that's how I.
Oh yes. Oh, her name should definitely be put on the board wherever you have, like.
Yes.
I mean, she was the queen of the Cooks for Christ.
She sure was.
And she had such zeal. It wasn't just the cooking. She was zealous for the poor. I mean, I know stories. She would take some of the hard cases home to her house to bathe because they were living on the street. And these were the women, of course. I mean, she again was one of and that was one of the most wonderful things, to see the love for the poor in the parish, and people just open their hearts. As I said, it wasn't universal, but it was, I think, and that was the disappointing thing later, that there was more of a separation, because I always saw this as the church's ministry, This is the ministry of what the church is about. This is Christ incarnate in his people, as he did when he walked the earth 2,000 years ago. Yeah. So, so when it get, and one of my heroes is someone like Dorothy Day in the Catholic Worker Movement. I trust you know who she is, and some of the other, Madonna House, Catherine Hardy. There's some of these movements in the church that care for the poor. And one of the things they said, and they, it's nice that the government wants to take care of the poor, but the church's care of the poor, they would say, includes the ministry of loving the poor. It isn't just fixing, through structures, the problem. And I remember Dorothy Day said she never took money from the government. I'm not saying you should do this, but that's what she did. And she said, no, it's got to be Christ's hands, and our work is infused with the love and with charity. I mean, love, caring for the poor without love, the Bible says that is not ultimately effective. That's Mother Teresa said that. Can't find anyone more a model of what it means to minister to the poor. So it's not just getting them food or getting them clothes or getting them a job or getting them a home. It's loving them. And that was something that happened that was wonderful to see.
So 40 years later, and the impact that you see that Bread of Life is making in our community. What are your thoughts 40 years later about how this dinner on Wednesday evenings has blossomed into this?
Well, it's wonderful. I mean, and the creativity and that you all, I mean, I've stayed connected really at a distance. Occasionally, as Gabi knows, I have a cable TV show I do here in Melrose where I live, and Tom and Gabi have been on a number of times. So I've been caught up with what's going on, and also through the newsletter. And my mother continued to be involved even until she died, really. Yeah. So I was, and my brother used to be very involved. I don't think he is anymore. Leo, do you remember Leo?
Sure.
So I had connection, but of course I moved first to Boston and then way up to the North Shore for my work. I happened to live here in Melrose the whole time. So I wasn't as connected personally, but obviously I rejoice that your work, which is your work now, has thrived and grown and become probably the most important ministry to the poor and work to the poor on the North Shore. So it's wonderful that God, and I rejoice in this campaign now you're doing, and I did send in a big check in memory of my mother. And,
Thank you.
As part of my tithe to continue to support Bread of Life. I did try, unfortunately I failed. And when I work at St. Patrick's Church in Stoneham, and that parish used to do ministry with Bread of Life, but it faded, and I was trying to resurrect it, but the deacon who was in charge of it died, sadly. So maybe further after the crisis, maybe I'll still work on that, trying to resurrect some kind of connection for that church.
Well, that's one thing that happened. We have 45 partner organizations now, most of which are churches, and also the temples and Muslim groups and secular groups. But it is as if St. Paul's birthed it, and it was no longer a ministry of St. Paul's, but it became a ministry of a lot of different communities of faith. And so there are it had a then we still are a faith-based organization, but now with people from all different congregations coming in and sharing that love, as you said.
Yeah. It reminds me of
alongside people who are suffering and struggling.
It reminds me of a line of Millard Fuller. He started Habitat for Humanity, and he called it hammer ecumenism. And what he meant by that, instead of sort of theological ecumenism, trying to figure out and talk about what we believe. It's in action, when in their case, building houses with the hammer. That's why he called it. But you might think of this too as feeding ecumenism, where there's a unity that takes place in serving the poor together in the name of God, even if our understandings of God are very different.
Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing your history with us, and thank you.
Well, thank you
all
for
you've done and continue to do
remembering
for
that
the Bread
I
of
was
Life.
part of it.
Yeah.
We'll never
It's
forget.
always nice to be remembered.
Yes.
All
It's,
right. Well, may the Lord continue to bless the ministry and prosper it and provide for it. And may we meet Christ in the poor, as Jesus told us we would. And in serving the poor, we serve him. Amen.
Amen.
All
Thank
right.
you, Father Jurgen. We'll be in touch soon.
Okay, thank you. God
Have a
bless.
great day.
All right, you too.
Take care. Bye-bye.